In today's world, you can't live without money. You need money for just about everything. You need money to pay your rent. You need money to buy food, to pay for medical treatment, and etc. etc. You can't do anything without money. In a way, it's like we're literally slaves to the money. What most people don't know is that statement is more literal than you could ever imagine. Money, specifically the US dollar, was created to enslave you. The Federal Reserve, which prints and regulates US currency, was presented to the American people as a solution for America's need for a national bank at the time. It was the ultimate tool of enslavement. The Federal Reserve Act conspiracy is a deep one, and it traces back to the elite of our world, a secret meeting on an island where ancient child sacrifices were made, and even the sinking of the Titanic. By the end of this video, you will understand why the US dollar was created to enslave you. Hey guys, I hope all is well. Welcome back to The Truth Is, where I drop new videos exposing the truth weekly. In today's episode, we will be talking about the Federal Reserve Act. Let's get right into it. Ever wondered where money actually comes from? It all starts with the Federal Reserve, the most powerful bank you never step foot in. The Federal Reserve doesn't just print money, it creates it digitally. When the government needs funds, the Treasury issues bonds. The Federal Reserve buys those bonds, and in exchange, it creates new money out of thin air, literally typing dollars into existence. That new money is then sent to big commercial banks. They use that money to make loans, buy assets, or invest, all while charging interest, of course. Eventually, some of that money makes its way to the public through mortgages, credit cards, business loans, etc., etc. But every dollar borrowed comes with a price, debt. And who gets paid in the end? The banks and the Federal Reserve. Our money is not backed by gold or silver, but by trust, debt, and a signature from the system that creates money out of nothing. Before the Federal Reserve provided the US with its currency, America was operating off the gold standard. The gold standard is a monetary system where the value of a country's currency is directly linked to a fixed quantity of gold. Under this system, a nation's currency is exchangeable for a set amount of gold, and the amount of money in circulation is theoretically limited by the country's gold reserves. This system aims to provide price stability and limit inflation by restricting the amount of currency that can be created. Essentially, every dollar bill printed in circulation was backed by physical gold that was held in a bank. While the gold standard did have its issues, at least it gave real physical value to paper money printed. It prevented the government from just printing unlimited money that was backed by nothing, sorta like we have today. Our money is backed by the word of the Federal Reserve. Who are the Federal Reserve? The most rich elite bankers of our world. The American people unknowingly trust the elite bankers who own the Federal Reserve to provide us with our cash supply. While this is scary enough as it is, when you find out how the Federal Reserve Act was established and the evil behind it, you would never look at money the same again. The start of the Federal Reserve could be traced back to the Eldridge Plan. The Eldridge Plan was a 1910 proposal for a major overhaul of the US banking system, aiming to create a central bank called the National Reserve Association. It was developed by a group of elite bankers and politicians. The men leading this new central banking proposal was Senator Nelson Eldridge, Henry P. Davison, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg. These elite men came up with the plan for the Federal Reserve during a secret meeting that was hidden from the American people. In 1910, a secret meeting took place behind locked doors the public was never supposed to know about. This top secret meeting took place on a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island, which was a remote, luxurious retreat for America's wealthiest men. This cold November night, a private rail car arrived carrying 6 of the most powerful bankers and politicians in the US at the time. They were disguised under fake names and sworn to secrecy. They claimed that they were traveling for a duck hunting contest, but in reality, they weren't there to vacation. They were there to redesign the American financial system behind closed doors and enslave the American people to debt forever. The secret meeting was led by Senator Nelson Eldridge and backed by all the big elites like J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and the National City Bank, which was the biggest bank in New York City. This group of elites drafted a plan that would hand the control of the US money over to a centralized banking cartel. They called it the Eldridge Plan. Now, for those who know their history, you might have already known this, but what most people don't know about is the dark history of Jekyll Island, where they held this top secret meeting. The Jekyll Island Club was established in 1886 by a group of America's most powerful elite families, including names like J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and William K. Vanderbilt. They purchased the entire island for $125,000 and turned it into the most exclusive private club in the world. a winter playground for the elite. By the early 1900s, the club boasted members who controlled over 1/6 of the world's wealth. The island had strict privacy enforcement. There was no press, no members of the public, just complete and total secrecy, while the elite did whatever their hearts desired. While the club was said to feature hunting, tennis, and elegant balls, what actually took place was strange rituals. It was also a place where real business was conducted in private, including deals that shaped the US forever. Before the island was turned into the elite's secret club retreat, it was originally inhabited by Native Americans long before European settlement. Archaeological evidence indicates human presence on the island dating back thousands of years. It was believed that the island was inhabited by the Native American tribe called the Quail people. The Quail people had some rather controversial religious practices. One of the things they were known to do was make child offering sacrifices, specifically newborn babies, to their gods for blessings. They did this on Jekyll Island, and it remained a part of the island's dark history. When the group of elite men purchased the island, they already knew about its history. It seemed that they actually might have chosen this island for that very reason, as they chose to build over not only the native sacred burial land, but also their cursed sacrifice sites. The building that housed the Jekyll Club was built right over native sacrifice site, the very same place where the natives spilled the blood of the innocent as offerings. This man claims that he went to the island and he did the tour that Jekyll Island offers, stating that the tour guide confirmed the story to be true.
Thing that's built and visible today is actually sitting right on top of something that was significant in the Indian village when it existed. So he said the fact that this whole place had to go into ruins and then be rebuilt and become an archaeological state park, he said it actually helped us identify the native history because the club itself had almost erased that. And so I said, well, let's look at the museum. I want to see some of the Indian stuff. So I've got a painting that you might want to see. It's actually the copy of the original. We've got it under lock and key. So I got a painting that actually shows the Indians. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of ceremony, and it's got the fire, and it's a typical, either they're having a party or they're having a war scene, and then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way, or had totem poles or that kind of stuff, but this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting, spilling the blood on this altar. I'm wanting to know, where is this altar? And so I asked him, I said, can you take me to this altar? I often pray over these things, and it's very beneficial for the land and for the country and for the people. Can I go to this altar and see it? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? He said, well, Rockefeller was.
Now, this parlor, that's where those guys, J.P. Morgan and all those guys, actually conceived of the Federal Reserve, right? Right over that altar.
That's exactly right. It's the room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and plan to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act.
Wow.
So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system on the parlor sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.
The Jekyll Club building was where the 6 elite men had their secret meeting that led to the creation of the Eldridge Plan, and though it was publicly rejected at first, it quietly morphed into what we know today as the Federal Reserve. The public had no idea this meeting ever happened until years later. Public sentiment was fiercely against banking monopolies. The men feared that if the public found out the nation's monetary policies was being designed by private bankers, it would be rejected outright. The true nature of the meeting wasn't revealed until decades later by participant Frank Vanderlip, who later admitted if it had been public, it would have been labeled a conspiracy.
First of all, Jekyll Island is a real island. It's off the coast of Georgia. And it was on that island back in 1910 that the Federal Reserve System was conceived at a highly secret meeting that took place there. In 1910, Jekyll Island was privately owned by a small group of millionaires. In those days, they were millionaires. In today's dollars, they would be billionaires from New York. This is where their families went to spend the winter months. It was a resort island, a resort club. It was called the Jekyll Island Club. This is where the Federal Reserve System was conceived, is in that clubhouse. So let's tell that story. It all began in November of 1910, when Senator Nelson Aldrich sent his private railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station, where there it was in readiness for the arrival of himself and 6 other men who were instructed to come under conditions of great secrecy. For the next 9 days, these men sat around a table and hammered out all the important details of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. And for quite a few years after that, these men denied that any such meeting ever took place. It wasn't until after the Federal Reserve was firmly established that only then did they begin to talk openly about it. They wrote books on it. One of them wrote a magazine article, and they gave interviews to newspaper reporters. Well, who were these men? The first one I've already mentioned, the one with the railroad car, Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was the Republican whip in the Senate. He was also chairman of the National Monetary Commission. Aldrich was a business associate of J.P. Morgan. He was the father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr. The second person at the meeting was Abraham Piatt Andrew, who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. He later became a congressman, but he was very prominent in banking circles. Frank Vanderlip was there. He was the president of the National City Bank of New York, which was the largest and the most powerful of all the banks in the country, representing the financial interests of William Rockefeller and the international investment firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Henry Davison was there. He was the senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Charles Norton was present. He was the president of the First National Bank of New York, which was another one of the giants. Also, there was Benjamin Strong, who was the head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And finally, there was Paul Warburg, who was probably the most important of all the men there because of his knowledge of banking. He was a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France. Paul Warburg was one of the wealthiest men in the world. Those are the 7 men who were on Jekyll Island, and as incredible as it may seem, they represented approximately 1/4 of the wealth of the entire world.
What began on a secret island still controls your money to this very day. There was a dark, sinister reason they chose Jekyll Island. The creation of the Federal Reserve was as spiritual as it was financial. These elites sat on top of a child sacrifice site where they drafted the plan that enslaved the entire country and eventually the world. Now, while most of the elite were fully behind the new central banking system that seemed to greatly benefit them, some elite men weren't and fought against it being established. Those who were trying to get the Federal Reserve Act passed saw these people as a problem they needed solved before they could fulfill their master plan. On April 10, 1912, coincidentally, all the men who opposed the Federal Reserve ended up on the Titanic. John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus were elite men who just so happened to be outspoken opponents of the Federal Reserve. Strangely, they were all invited on the Titanic voyage by the man behind the Titanic himself, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, who was the majority stockholder of the company that owned the Titanic called IMM, also just so happened to be one of the men fighting to establish the Federal Reserve Act. He was actually scheduled to board the Titanic, but at the very last minute, decided not to attend the cruise. Luckily for him, as all of the other men who were against the Federal Reserve drowned on the ship when it sank. Whether this was by coincidence or orchestrated, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I will say that it is quite suspicious that the men with power against the Federal Reserve just so happened to all die on the Titanic. The owner of that ship, who was a part of establishing the Federal Reserve, decided not to attend at the very last minute. There was also no Rothschilds, Vanderbilts, or Rockefellers on the ship, a ship that was a status symbol for the elite. That to me tells me all I need to know. And with no one to oppose it, the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law just 1 year after the Titanic sinking. The Federal Reserve Act was passed by Congress on December 23, 1913, and signed into law the same day by President Woodrow Wilson. It was passed just before Christmas, when many members of Congress had already left for the holidays. The timing was clearly intentional to avoid any sort of opposition by others in the public. In secrecy, they enslaved Americans and replaced the gold standard, which backed our money with gold. Now our money isn't backed by anything. None of this was a coincidence. It was the plan since the beginning of this country. These Masonic elite wanted to turn America into their paradise on earth, where they can enslave the population and use them as their slave labor. While the elite got richer, the working class got more and more poor. They printed more and more worthless money and lent it to the American people with interest. There's a reason why our money is full of occult symbols. And now you know exactly why. As the richest elite men created the currency over land in which child offerings were being made. It is alleged that the elite who run this world are Moloch and Baal worshippers. This Jekyll Island connection seems to add more fuel to that fire. These elite men literally held their secret meeting that changed the world, where children were ritually offered. And just coincidentally, you can find a few prominent occult symbols. The most obvious is the all-seeing eye, a symbol used by the Freemasons. But most importantly, they also have a hidden owl on the dollar bill. The owl has been adopted as a symbol for Moloch or Baal. This is the reason you can find a giant owl statue at the Bohemian Grove, which is a secret summer retreat for the elite. The elite attend the retreat every summer, where they all participate in a mock sacrifice in front of a giant owl statue. It is not a coincidence the dollar bill contains all these strange occult symbols, especially after we now know how it was created. This is all connected to something much darker than most could ever understand. Well, I'm gonna end this one here. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.